Okay. So, we're working on a project for KC, and my workstation is garbage, disgusting, and even I'm a little grossed out. Let's just cover all those up. That's crazy. Okay, we are priming today. So we're priming the Tyranids. It says extra large, but it doesn't look like extra large. This is definitely not extra large. Oh my god. Fuck. God damn it, these are small.
No longer there. Henry, will you do one thing for me? Will you hold my right side, baby? And no cry, King Henry. That's a thing I never can do. If I lose the flower of English, I shall lose the branch too. I shall.
Me, motherfucker. I can't believe it.
There was fiddling and dancing. Moonlight days no more, till the women grew so tired they could no longer there. They could no longer there. King Henry, King Henry, will you do one thing for me? Will you open bright sun. Find my baby and find my baby. Oh no, cried King Henry. That's a thing I never can do. If I lose a flower of England, I shall lose the branch too. I shall lose the branch too. There was fiddling and dancing on the day the babe was born, but poor Queen Jane beloved lay cold at the stone. I don't see a lot of money here. Okay. Queen Jane lay in labor for 9 days or more, till her women grew so tired they could no longer there. They could no longer King Henry, King Henry, will you do one thing for me? Will you open my right side? Find my baby and find my baby. Oh no, cried King Henry. That's a thing I never can do. If I lose a flower of England, I shall lose the branch too. I shall lose the branch too. There was fiddling and dancing on the day the babe was born, but for Queen Jane beloved lay cold as a stone, lay cold as a stone. I don't see a lot of money here. Hang me, oh hang me, I'll be dead alone. Hang me, oh hang me, I'll be dead alone. Wouldn't mind the hanging, but the lane in the grave so long. Oh, been all around this world.
Inside Llewyn Davis is a folk song. The Coen brothers' best film of the decade is nonetheless a divisive one. The arguably quite unlikable main character and the strange structure make it a movie that is difficult for a fan of the Coens' lighter comedies or straighter thrillers to approach. But for those who give it a chance, there is a lot of very intimate emotion and subtext to discover. It provides a critical but still somewhat sympathetic look at the starving artist, a talented, if flawed, individual whose inspired and personal work is constantly overlooked in favor of commercially manufactured products that are easy to mass market.
I don't see a lot of money here.
And who is constantly faced with the question of whether or not it is worth continuing to pursue their dream. The movie sees the Coens reuniting with executive music producer T-Bone Burnett, who had previously sourced the folk tunes from Oh Brother Where Art Thou for the film's beautiful collection of live-recorded folk songs, which lend a deep empathy to the film. But the setting of the 1961 folk scene is more than a simple backdrop for a generalized starving artist tale. Inside Llewyn Davis is actually a deep and introspective take on folk music itself. What's most beautiful about this movie is that it uses its central motif as a metaphor in such an incredible way, and I am certain that this is what the entire concept of the film is based around. I've long loved folk music in both form, subject, and tradition, but the Coens turn a very critical eye to it. Folk music, in the traditional sense, is the voice of the oppressed and the working poor. There is humor and levity sometimes, but overall it passes down stories from generation to generation of heartbreak, poverty, depression, struggle, death, and loneliness. For many generations, it passes from the working poor to each other through oral tradition, where music and word of mouth is the only form of art and communication affordable to people who, as often as not, cannot even read or write. Then, in the mid-20th century, recording technology becomes widely available, and now folk music is open to everyone, even the upper-class white yuppies who Llewyn is friends with, and it touches the empathetic corners of their souls in a way that they may not even think about day to day. They no longer have many of these struggles, but through the music they can feel like they do for a moment, with the safety of actually being well off. And it gives a sense of meaning to their mundane existence, a longing which they have no need for anymore. And sometimes they do have some of these longings, and the music helps them become absorbed in them, revel in them. Folk music here is a metaphor for depression. Which brings us to Llewyn. Llewyn does have some pretty understandable reasons to be depressed. He is unable to make money doing what he loves, what he is legitimately good at, and the world around him seems more interested in crafted commercial products and flash than what he feels is his genuine talent and the music he connects with and cares about.
Probably heard that one before. So it's never new and it never gets old and it's a folk song.
His father is old and has dementia and shows him no affection. His situation with Jean is pretty messed up, and most importantly, his musical partner and best friend has died. This is the strongest core part of his depression, and the conflict that Llewyn fails to overcome in the film. The meaning and message of this apparent shaggy dog story is not quite as obscure as it may at first seem. Jean spells out the central theme of the film to Llewyn in their chat in the cafe.
You're the one who's not getting anywhere. You don't want to get anywhere. Me and Jim try. We try. You sleep on the couch.
It's a bad thing to go in my face.
You know, you don't want to go anywhere. And that's why all the same shit is going to keep happening to you because you want it to.
Is that why?
Yes, and also because you're an asshole.
The film follows the structure of both an individual folk song and the folk tradition as a whole. The same core beats repeating over and over, the struggle, the lost love, lamenting its woes, and no sudden happy ending, but rather wallowing in despair, and the folk tradition holding on to these emotions, passing them down from generation to generation. It's romantic in its tragedy, and that's exactly the point. Llewyn is in love with his depression, in love with the struggle, in love with his own hopelessness. It's really not that uncommon, and I think it's something that most people can relate to some extent, because it gives one's life meaning. Many people have had that time in their life where they obsess over some object of affection, be it a person or a circumstance or a physical possession, and tell themselves that they can never have happiness until they find this one particular thing. It can give them drive, make them feel like they have real meaning in their lives, build up this object of affection in their mind as some ultimate salvation, and themselves as a noble hero on the way to achieving that goal. Likewise, this perspective can give someone a certain self-gratifying justification of anything that stands in the way of their goal as being a villain, an oppressor. They may be right, or they may be wrong, But there is a definite indulgence which is not difficult to find in this state of mind. Often it's just enough to feel something strongly, the physical palpitation of the heart and the tears in your eyes, the swelling in your stomach, and this is something that Lewin cannot let go of. Lewin's ultimate failure in his Odyssey is that he is completely unable to his best friend, and playing with him, building their career together, was what made Lewin happy. After he dies, Lewin stubbornly decides that playing with Mike specifically was the only way that he could be happy in a folk group.
What are you doing? What is that? What are you doing?
Oh, it's Mike's part.
Don't do that.
It's Mike's part.
I know what it is. Don't do that.
And the only way he can be happy now is to express his sorrow by continuing to play the songs they played, but alone. And he can't do that and keep being successful. Every jerk and selfish music producer who gets in the way of this is his enemy. They are the system that keeps him down, keeps his life in chaos. And they are legitimate obstacles. But throughout the film, Lewin is presented with possible pathways out of his depression. His ex, he learns, did not go through with her abortion, and he passes by the town where she lives, an opportunity to reach out and reconnect with her, to become a father, and to forge new bonds and find new purpose. But he must forge his career as a solo folk artist, so he ignores it. The cat that Lewin finds is lost like him, has no owner, without a home, and could be a new bond in his life. But he leaves it behind, alone in the darkness, to carry on with his path. It is also likely a metaphor for Jean's fetus, as we can see an animal later struggling, bleeding on the side of the road. Perhaps that same cat, perhaps not. Or perhaps it is the opportunity of being a father that Lewin is against squandering. He is given the opportunity to sacrifice what he has built up as this idea of perfect authenticity, to be part of a folk group, but he cannot fathom singing with anyone but Mike. He refuses to even entertain the possibility. He is given the opportunity to join the army, which is his chance to escape his journey not for happiness, but to become a mindless automaton, the way that he feels the Marine in the first segment of the film is, to escape his emotion. But he gets one more chance to stick to his path, and he takes it. This chance may actually be a way for him to escape his situation, but Lewin refuses to let go of his struggle and resentment, and gets drunk and abusive the night before, which leads to him ending up exactly where he started. Even Bob Dylan's appearance at the end seems to be mocking Lewin's lost potential, with Dylan performing a tune with very similar themes to Lewin's farewell, as Lewin lies in the dirt, beaten and broken back down again. But the difference is that Dylan's tune, while based heavily on the same folk songs Lewin sings, is an evolution, an original work. Dylan takes from the past but innovates, whereas Lewin cannot move on. He refuses to evolve and change to create success for himself. The ending is still a bit of a mystery, to be honest, as the situation surrounding it seems different, and it doesn't really make any sense as any sort of literal time loop, but the event plays out more or less identically, which suggests to me that it's more of a metaphorical than literal repetition. Like a folk song, the first refrain reoccurs in the last refrain, an acceptance of the situation. There's the thought there that it's not going to change, that the struggle is eternal, and it may be hard to escape. Anyone who struggled with depression knows that, but we understand now that for Lewin, it's more than that. He doesn't want it to. He's in love with his struggle, with his hatred, with his feeling of being an outsider, his own self-pity, and his inability to complete his cathartic journey over the death of his friend. It gives his life a sense of purpose, this constant misery, and he has built up that there is only one goal which will make him happy, closing himself off to all other possibilities. Folk music and self-indulgent depression, hand in hand, is the true tragedy of Inside Llewyn Davis. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed, please consider liking the video and subscribing to my channel. I'm really enjoying making these essays, looking deeper into the films that I love, so there'll be plenty more to come, along with my own films and updates on my new feature film project. It's an exciting time, and I'd love if you could join me on this journey. Thank you.
Citizen Kane is a movie that's been mired in controversy since before it was even released. One of the more popular stories surrounding it regarding the true authorship of the film, who actually wrote it.
Meg, it's Orson Welles.
With David Fincher's newest film about screenwriter Herman Mankiewicz coming out very soon, I think it's worth looking back at where much of that specific controversy stems from, and the woman who stoked the flames. In February of 1971, film critic Pauline Kael's essay, Raising Cain, appeared in 2 consecutive issues of The New Yorker before being included as the preface in the Citizen Kane book published later that year. Raising Cain is an all-encompassing work about the making of the film, but the thing that it's most remembered for is its central damning claim that Orson Welles didn't write a single word of the script and stole credit away from Mankiewicz, the film's true creative visionary. Orson Welles wasn't around when Citizen Kane was written early in 1940. Across the 50,000 words of her essay, Kael tells the story of Mankiewicz's evolution from journalist to screenwriter, his connection with William Randolph Hearst, upon whom Charles Foster Kane was based, and the writing of the film's screenplay. And she casts Mankiewicz in the role of the tragic hero. He's erratic, alcoholic, unreliable, and yet a total uncelebrated genius. Mankiewicz was already writing radio dramas for Orson Welles' series The Campbell Playhouse, when the two decided they would make a great big American-sized story about a larger-than-life figure that would be told from differing points of view. American, the film's original title, was written in early 1940 while Mankiewicz was staying in Victorville, California, where he was recovering from injuries sustained in a car wreck. Staying with him were actor John Houseman and Mank's secretary Rita Alexander, to whom he dictated the whole of the script. Not present was Orson Welles. According to Mrs. Alexander, Welles may indeed have given advice and offered the odd suggestion here and there over the phone, but he was so busy with his radio programs and a little fling with Dolores Del Rio that he didn't from Mankiewicz from the first paragraph to the last, and then when the first draft was completed and they all went back to Los Angeles, did the secretarial work at Mankiewicz's house on the rewriting and the cuts, and who handled the script at the studio until after the film was shot, says that Welles didn't write or dictate one line of the shooting script of Citizen Kane. If Mankiewicz is the hero of Pauline Kael's essay, then Welles is the clear villain. He was already a towering figure with a reputation that ranged from mad genius to raging egomaniac.
Orson Welles. Orson Welles.
Orson Welles.
Orson Welles! Orson Welles! Oh, the most hideous man alive!
And for as much as Kael praises his talents as a director, the portrait she paints of him is practically a sociopath. Kael paints him as a scheming narcissist who is utterly obsessed with the boy wonder prodigy label so many people had thrown at him. It's a harsh take, but reading her account of Mankiewicz's troubles, it's hard not to agree with her. See, when Citizen Kane was completed, Welles attempted to steal the writing credit away from Mankiewicz and claim it entirely for himself. But in the end, as we know, he was unsuccessful and had to settle for co-credit, even though the co-credit he did receive was, according to Kael, completely unearned. No other director in the history of movies has been so open in his delight, so eager to share with us the game of pretending. And Welles' silly pretense of having done everything himself is just another among the battered and bruised. Throw a rock and you'll hit a dozen stories of writers being underpaid, undervalued, and refused the credit they deserve. Herman Mankiewicz wasn't the first mistreated screenwriter, and nor was he last, but there was something to be said for the fact that the true visionary genius behind the quote-unquote greatest film of all time was pretty much lost in the shadow of a talented, albeit spoiled tyrant. That was Pauline Kael's intention in writing Raising Cain, at least. And in the wake of its publication, Orson Welles' reputation was severely damaged. The mainstream press praised Kael for both her findings and for ripping Welles a new one. Except, there's just one problem. Pauline Kael was wrong. Now, Herman Mankiewicz passed away in 1953, so it wasn't as though he and Welles could have gotten together to hash out the truth of what occurred and who wrote what, but that didn't stop people from racing to Welles' defense. One of those was director Peter Bogdanovich, friend and basically just disciple of Welles. In his rebuttal, The Cain Mutiny, published in Esquire magazine in October of 1972, he disputed many of the claims Kael made. See, in 1969, Bogdanovich recorded a series of conversations he had with Wells for a book he was writing, and everything Wells said contradicted Cale's conclusions.
Were there sessions where you just all sat around and talked, or did you write certain scenes and Mankiewicz wrote certain scenes? There were sessions where I worked with Mankiewicz at the beginning. Then he went away to the desert and wrote his script, and I stayed in Hollywood and wrote mine. Having decided to work on different scenes, or both? No, the same script. Yes. And I got his script, and I used what I wanted, and used what of mine I liked, without really talking with him much. And that was it. That was it.
But, okay, that was Wells talking decades after the script had been written. He could have very well been fudging the details, or just lying. However, what about Catherine Trosper, Wells' secretary? Herman Mankiewicz's secretary, Rita Alexander, may have said that Wells didn't write a single word, but when asked, Miss Trosper responded, "Then I'd like to know when was all that stuff I was always typing for Mr. Wells. Orson was always writing and rewriting. I saw scenes written during production. Even while he was being made up, he'd be dictating dialogue." A number of rebuttals from a swath of critics and journalists followed, but some of the most definitive work came from scholar Robert Carringer, who plowed through the archives at RKO, the studio who distributed Citizen Kane, including a near day-to-day record of the scripting period. His findings were published in an article for Critical Inquiry magazine in 1978. The first two drafts of Citizen Kane were indeed written exclusively by Herman Mankiewicz between March and May of 1940. Pauline Kael had gotten that much correct. But there were 5 drafts that followed that she was either unaware of or just completely ignored. In his essay, Carringer detailed a laundry list of changes that occurred throughout the evolution of the screenplay. If you're interested, I'll leave a link in the description below. But there are 2 important things he revealed. The first is that when work on the third draft began in June of 1940, Mankiewicz was off for 5 weeks on assignment writing the film Comrade X for MGM, whereas Orson Welles had just returned to Hollywood. So despite what Rita Alexander said, it's almost guaranteed that those revisions were done by Wells. The second is that Mankiewicz's sprawling 250-page first draft was a pale version of what was to come. It was in that third draft that Wells began sculpting the story into something that was both manageable and cinematic. The famous breakfast scene that flashes across years is a perfect example of the evolution of the script. Mankiewicz's version plays each of these moments out as complete scenes full of dialogue, but Wells reshaped and condensed them into a handful of brief but powerfully effective images that tells the same story, but in a fraction of the time. According to Carringer, that was what comprised the majority of Wells's involvement in the scripting, revising long sequences of exposition into the shorter, often elliptical style that the film became so famous for. That, and for fleshing out the character of Charles Foster Kane, who is less a character and more a skeleton in Mankiewicz's 2 drafts. It wasn't until Wells stepped in that Kane was really brought to life on the page. It's strange then, reading all of this, to try and see just how Pauline Kael maneuvered her way towards the claims that she made. No, Wells didn't write the first draft, but his contribution to later drafts was so palpable that to deny it wasn't just odd, but dishonest. Couple this with every scathing line she wrote about him, and it just seems as though Kael simply had an agenda, that she held some kind of horrible grudge against Orson Welles, or perhaps just the way that film culture worships directors over anyone else on the crew. There's a valid point to be made about that, but using her essay as an opportunity to attack Welles just seems petty, and even deceptive. Peter Bogdanovich thought the same thing, and he had all the more reason to. See, his essay held the smoking gun in all of this. This is UCLA professor Howard Suber, who recounted to Bogdanovich that he was also writing an essay about Citizen Kane at the same time that Pauline Kael was writing hers. Turns out, she approached him to see if he wanted to split the money she'd received to write her essay so that both of their essays would appear in the Citizen Kane book. Suber agreed and shared with her all of the research he had done, research that included interviews with Rita Alexander, with Herman Mankiewicz's widow Sarah, and with the film's editor Robert Wise, people Pauline Kael never interviewed herself. However, the essay that Howard Suber submitted to her wasn't published in the book, and he not only never heard another word from her, but she never credited him or his work despite basing a significant majority of her essay off of the work he had done. In other words, the very thing Pauline Kael had accused Orson Welles of doing, she did herself. Plus, Howard Suber didn't even agree with her claim that Welles didn't have a hand in writing. His own opinion was that the authorship of the film was a very open question. And as to the claim that Welles attempted to rob Mankiewicz of any on-screen credit, my own thought is that it's a rather strange accusation to make. If Welles was indeed the credit-nabbing egomaniac that Kael claimed he was, why would he have chosen to share his own director title card with cinematographer Greg Toland? It doesn't make sense. It's inconsistent. Orson Welles was, and still is, a controversial figure held in both esteem and disdain, but all of this just makes Pauline Kael's sniping at Welles seem malicious, and her essay itself both sloppy and strangely angry. It'll be curious to see how David Fincher's film depicts the writing of Citizen Kane, and in what light it presents those involved with the film. Herman Mankiewicz was certainly an underappreciated figure. Pauline Kael was right about that. But acting as though he was the sole creative visionary behind the film is just poor research. And because of that, Raising Cain remains a particularly strange and hypocritical episode from Hollywood's not-too-distant past.
Labor for 9 days or more till her women grew so tired.
Box set painting guy.
No longer there. King Henry, King Henry, will you do one thing for me? Will you open my eyes and find my baby? And find my baby. Oh no, cried King Henry, that's a thing I never can do. If I lose a flower of England, I shall lose the branch too. I shall lose the branch too. There was fiddling and dancing on the day the babe was born, but poor Queen Jane, beloved, lay cold as a stone, lay cold as a stone.
I don't see a lot of money here.
Shit.
for the Black Orcs. In part 1, we painted the Black Orcs themselves. This part we are going to paint the goblins, and we're going to start off with the skin. We are going to go with a lighter skin color than what we used on the Black Orcs, so WhiteMetalGames color Sick Green is a good starting point. To our Sick Green, we are going to add some Escorpina Green, which is a very bright and light colored green. Add about 40% of that to the mix with our 60% Sick Green. For our next 2 layers, we are going to be adding pale yellow to our mix both times. For this layer, it's basically another highlight layer over the entire body of our goblin. And then for our final layer, it's just an extreme contrast, adding some extra detail to small areas like the knuckles, but especially in the face. He has such a cartoony face. I want to put a lot of emphasis on the large ears and nose. Decided to go back, add a little bit more of a darker green shade just here and there on the goblins. To be honest, there's not a whole lot of areas that need an extra amount of shade on these figures. So if you wanted to skip this step, you could, but there's a few little nooks and crannies where I wanted a little bit of a darker tone. With the ears and the big nose, it would be a shame not to do something a little bit more interesting with those. So we're going to give them a little bit of color using very thin layers of thinned down brown rose. We want this paint thinned, and we want to slowly build up the color so it blends seamlessly with the very light green we have underneath. And then we're going to add a little bit more emphasis to our brown rose by adding some glazes of gory red. We want this to be very, very thin, essentially just colored water, and no more than 2 glazes. A little bit around the cheeks, a little on the nose, and a little bit in the deep recesses of the ears. Now for the rest of the paint job, basically we're doing the exact same thing that we did in part 1, so I really don't want to repeat that all here. But there are some differences. Because we are working on tiny goblins and tiny little surface areas, we don't need as many layers, so we can actually skip a few. For example, with the red here in the previous video, we did a step mix of gory red mixed with vermilion before moving on to the vermilion. Because we're just painting a small chest piece here, we can just move straight on to the vermilion and then add the skin tone to that. Now for our purple with the kind of pseudo funky color shift paint effect, we have to do the same mixture pretty much as is because of the colors that we're adding here, going from purple to red to orange to yellow. Just want to note that, again, this was kind of just experimental when I came up with it. And I do want to play around with it a little more. Really couldn't do it here because I have to have the armor match the black orcs. But on the head goblin, the one with the large helmet, I did go a little bit further with the orange and yellow highlights. Again, not too much, but I could definitely see this coming back in a future project where I can play around with this a little bit more, go a little bit more extreme with contrast, or hopefully you'll beat me to it and try it on your own. Something else to note, to add a little bit more variety to the team, because I have duplicates of every single skull, I took this little goblin here who has a bracelet, and I used that bracelet because it kind of looked like the edge of a glove, so I painted one hand brown. Again, just to add a little bit more variety if you're not interested in doing it sculpting or converting. And then the final thing I want to mention is that whenever you're painting a unit, you want to keep your colors consistent. But when you have a team like this, where they're all dressed differently, you do have to make for some accommodations for that. On this particular goblin, I already used a lot of browns on him because he's wearing a lot of clothing or leather. And I didn't want to do the shirt just brown as well. I only used 2 browns on every other miniature. So I decided to go a little bit lighter, just to make him stand out a little bit more. And because we didn't go too extreme, basically we're in the lighter brown range using our beige and our heavy brown. So it doesn't stand out too much as if we were to use blue or something like that. But it is something I wanted to point out. Occasionally you do have to mix in another color when you're doing sort of a mismatched team like this one. And there we go. There is the second half of our Black Orc Blood Bowl team. As you can see, when we're painting smaller miniatures, we can actually get away with painting them a little bit quicker. You don't have to worry about scaling down every single technique that you use on a larger figure. You can skip a few layers because the surface areas are smaller. But in the case of these guys, because we have some larger areas in the miniature, the face, I want to put a lot of emphasis on the large ears and nose. Here and there on the goblins. And then we're going to add a little bit more emphasis to our brown rose by adding some glazes of hood. But there's a few little nooks and crannies where I wanted a little bit of a darker tone. With the ears and the big nose, it would be a shame not to do something a little bit more interesting with those. So we're going to give them a little bit of color using very thin layers of thinned down brown rose. We want this paint thinned, and we want to slowly build up color so it blends seamlessly with the very light green we have underneath. And then we're going to add a little bit more emphasis to our brown rose by adding some glazes of gory red. We want this to be very, very thin, essentially just colored water, and no more than 2 glazes. A little bit around the cheeks, a little on the nose, and a little bit in the deep recesses of the ears. Now for the rest of the paint job, basically we're doing the exact same thing that we did in part 1, so I really don't want to repeat that all here. But there are some differences. Because we are working on tiny goblins and tiny little surface areas, we don't need as many layers, so we can actually skip a few. For example, with the red here in the previous video, we did a step mix of gory red mixed with vermilion before moving on to the vermilion. Because we're just painting a small chest piece here, we can just move straight onto the vermilion and then add the skin tone to that. Now, for our purple with the kind of pseudo-funky color shift paint effect, we have to do the same mixture pretty much as is because of the colors that we're adding here, going from purple to red to orange to yellow. Just want to note that, again, this was kind of just experimental when I came up with it. And I do want to play around with it a little more. Really couldn't do it here because I have to have the armor match the black horns. But on the head goblin, the one with the large helmet, I did go a little bit further with the orange and yellow highlights. Again, not too much, but I could definitely see this coming back in a future project where I can play around with this a little bit more, go a little bit more extreme with contrast. Or hopefully you'll beat me to it and try it on your own. Something else to note, to add a little bit more variety to the team, because I do consider this a sculpt, I took this little goblin here who has a bracelet, and I used that bracelet because it kind of looked like the edge of a glove, so I painted one hand around. Again, just to add a little bit more variety if you're not interested in doing any sculpting or converting. And then the final thing I want to mention is that whenever you're painting a unit, you want to keep your colors consistent. But when you have a team like this, where they're all dressed differently, you do have to make for some accommodations for that. On this particular goblin, I already used a lot of browns on him because he's wearing a lot of clothing or leather, and I didn't want to do the shirt just brown as well. I only used 2 browns on every other miniature. So I decided to go a little bit lighter, just make him stand out a little bit more. And because we didn't go too extreme, basically we're in the lighter brown range using our beige and our heavy brown. So it doesn't stand out too much as if we were to use blue or something like that. But it is something I wanted to point out. Occasionally you do have to mix in another color when you're doing sort of a mismatched team like this one. And there we go. There is the second half of our Black Orc Blood Bowl team. As you can see, when we're painting smaller miniatures, we can actually get away with painting them a little bit quicker. You don't have to worry about scaling down every single technique that you use on a larger figure. We can skip a few layers because the surface areas are smaller. But in the case of these guys, because we have some larger areas of miniature, namely the nose and the ears on a few of them, that allows us to add some extra detail there. Old box set painting guide for the color. Then what we used to color green, add to our mix, both entire body of our goblin. And on these figures. So if you wanted to skip this step, you could. Those and a little part ones. We're moving on to the vermilion because we're just painting a small.
This is as fundamental as it gets, and will teach you how to prime your miniatures perfectly every time with really consistent results. My top 5 priming tips. So before you've done anything, read the can, or at the very least look at the little pictures because they are super helpful. I might have some adjustments to them, but each of your cans and then infograms, the little pictures that demonstrate distance, temperature, whatever, do hold them in mind. Temperature is really important now. There are 2 temperatures to bear in mind. There is the temperature of the can, and there is the temperature of your environment, which in the UK is bloody freezing at the moment. Now this one, it says 15 to 25 degrees C or 59 to 77 degrees Fahrenheit. The compact version of that is this can needs to be warm, so you can pop it in a water bath. That's super popular. If you do that, make sure you put the lid on. You don't want any moisture, screwing things up around the top of it. The other option is just to pop it up your jumper. I mean, if you're painting, if you pop it up there for 10 minutes, that will be enough to get it to a good solid temperature. I'm normally prepping my miniatures, so while I'm doing that, if I am going to be priming, then I take the primer and I pop it up my jumper. I do not recommend that you use a radiator, direct sunlight, or something like that to heat your can. It's not very controllable. It's a potentially volatile object, and too hot is definitely bad. So you want it warm, not boiling. Number 2 is the preparation of your miniature. Now, there's an easy start to this. It hasn't come from the factory sealed box. Give it a quick dust. We've got Series B XL here. Primer will grab onto that. A dust, hair, even worse, bit of fluff, anything, it will grab onto it, and it will, potentially really stick in the middle of a smooth panel. That'll look awful. That's going to ruin your paint job. And then the second one is the physical prep of the miniature. Now, I use sanding sponge for this. I'm going to probably say sanding tip by accident. I mean sanding sponge. Anywhere between 600 and 3,000 grit is fine, but keep it between 1,000 and 3,000 if you want to be super safe without it being a very, very smooth surface. Okay, now, of course, I picked something completely impractical to fit on the desk. Good job, Byron. But what I wanted to do is get something that's got a really long extended piece, or some sections, they're big, they're flattish, they're not hyper detailed, and they're going to show the type of thing that is going to show up in your primer. So let's get into this bad boy. We didn't pick a good one. We did pick a good one. You see all of these differing areas, that's not a line that's been sculptured there. You can actually see the molded lines just about on this. That probably won't show up during priming, but this will. So when you prime this surface, it's going to finish shiny, and when you prime this surface, it's going to finish matte. I can also see some areas that I think are more shiny because of mold release, and then in there, I don't know what it's down to. We've actually got some kind of straight lines crossing the hull. Now they will show up slightly, and it's going to take us absolutely no time at all to give us a little bit of TLC. So I'm going to grab some 1,000 grit. There you go, done. That's as far as I go. Grab yourself a stick of brush, or you can use the same brush that you use for dusting. Make sure you don't leave any fluff there, otherwise you're getting rid of one problem and adding another. But literally, that is as far as you need to go. Maybe find a more open section for the camera. Okay, this one here, we've got that. It shows up loads, there's a lot.
This was a big week for my Torment project, and it was a big week for myself as a creator. I'd successfully made a prototype piece and I'd made an epic centerpiece. Now was the time to complete the set with several other pieces of scatter. I knew I'd need lots of bits for this, so I went into it knowing that nothing was sacred. I printed this really amazing chained angel from my friends at Loot Studios, and I grabbed all of this stuff that's just been sitting on shelves forever. A lot of things that came from friends and colleagues. Nothing was safe from cutting up and using. Models designed by my friend Jazza, a rare collectible item, not safe. Castings sent to me by my friends at TWS, not safe. Everything was fair game. Everything would get used to help me create my vision. I even entered the playworld briefly to pick up a few special items to add to the weirdness of my personal vision of hell. The plan was simple. The steps were already well defined. I didn't need to figure them out, and I don't need to explain them to you here again. I could simply enjoy the process of seeing what things just wanted to fit together. I could just build, and it was glorious.
Oh my god.
This was a big week for my Torment project, and it was a big week for myself as a creator. I'd successfully made a prototype piece and I'd made an epic centerpiece. Now was the time to complete the set with several other pieces of scatter. I knew I'd need lots of bits for this, so I went into it knowing that nothing was sacred. I printed this really amazing chained angel for my friends at Loot Studios, and I grabbed all of this stuff that's just been sitting on shelves forever. A lot of things that came from friends and colleagues. Nothing was safe from cutting up and using. Models designed by my friend Jazza, a rare collectible item, not safe. Castings sent to me by my friends at TWS, not safe. Everything was fair game. Everything would get used to help me create my vision. I even entered the Plague World briefly to pick up a few special items to add to the weirdness of my personal vision of hell. The plan was simple. The steps were already well defined. I didn't need to figure them out, and I don't need to explain them to you here again. I could simply create without much thought. I could just enjoy the process of seeing what things just wanted to fit together. I could just build, and it was glorious. set was a major achievement for me. I rarely give myself permission to go deep into a project. Series videos don't do well on YouTube. Doing something different every week in order to perform well means doing a little bit of everything, but kind of a whole lot of nothing for myself. But the last 3 weeks, I just let myself go free and be a hobbyist, enjoying my craft for the sake of creation. And it was a wonderful experience. I now have this huge set that I'll be able to use for many years in many games. One day, a D&D campaign will take place in the world of Torment, and in time, many epic battles will be fought on this battlefield. This is my personal vision, and I'm proud as hell for bringing it into this world, and I can't wait to be able to use it for games. I really hope you guys enjoyed watching this video and this entire series, and I really thank those of you who watched it all the way through, and shared my journey with me. If you liked it, of course, hit the like button. Let me know in the comment section below. And what's up, hobby friends? My name is Casey, and this is eBay Miniature Rescues. Today, we're going to paint up the old World Creator model Zodgrod Wartsnaggit. I am so glad to be back, and I'm absolutely excited for 2021. I wanted to start this year off light and pull out an old model that's been laying around for quite a while. I bought this Road Trader era Runt Herder for $12.93. Not too bad for a named character model that can still be used in a modern game. And being a pewter model, I know that I can strip the rest of this paint off and start over. Let's jump right into getting this guy stripped and primed. No time to waste now that it's the new year. As for colors on this old fella, I figured I'd keep it pretty similar to most of the other orcs I've painted recently on this channel. I do want to do something with the hair because even in older pictures, this dude has some crazy stuff going on. I got a new wet palette for Christmas, so I figured I'd show how I go about setting that up for painting. Toss the papers that it comes with, use parchment paper instead, and lay down some paint. Now I did use the papers to kind of size out the parchment paper, so I guess they did serve a purpose. But that's it. Here are the main colors I'll be working with for this project. Some nice greens that can transition into lighter flesh tones. I'll throw in some blue and red to take care of the hair and eyes, and a variety of metallics to go with the rest of the model. The first thing I'm going to do is take care of the skin. I want to be a little messy with this because I want to wet blend some of the other tones into that base color. So I give each part a liberal coating and come in with highlight colors. Blend them into each other like you would on your palette, and when it dries, you get a really smooth blend. Next up, I'm going to start grabbing some other base coats and fill in more details. The hair in particular, I went with a desaturated purple and a nice light blue. I wet blended these lines together and highlighted each part individually by adding a white to the base color. So I don't know the lore behind this particular character, but I'm not going to change the wacky hair in fear that it would upset someone. I'm sure it already did. It's really nice to be back at the painting table. I took a week off for the holidays, and I've got to say, it was really nice, but it felt weird being away. Something about the love and support of this community just makes me want to work that much harder, and I guess I just miss you guys. For the metallics, I decided to go pretty simple with a dark steel. Once that's dry, I can come back in with a light silver and make everything really stand out. And it makes the metal look worn and used, which really matches my idea of what orcs are supposed to be. Kind of beaten down and always the underdog. Ooh, this right here is one of my favorite parts. But before we get to that, let's talk about what this model actually is in 40K today, and what I wanted to do with it. Here's the most current orc codex. Flipping through, there's a ton of really nice stuff, but let's get to the Runt Herder stats. Now, for some reason, I thought that this model could herd squigs. I don't know why, probably just wishful thinking. Well, he can't. But he can run with a large handful of Gretchen, which I am fully on board for. I do have a few of those lying around, but according to the book, I'm going to need more than a few to make this actually playable. So for now, I'm going to be on the hunt for a ton of Gretchen. I do wonder, how many could I paint in one sitting? A video from Old Town Products. I also wanted to point out this super sweet mug here. This was a gift from my wife, and she got it engraved just for me. Okay, so we're entering the third level of Inception right now, but I need to throw this out there. If this video gets, say, 2,000 likes, I'll get an orc tattoo and film it. These videos tend to get around 1,000, so if you
In our last video, my boyfriend went on a long rant about how
feel like it's a pretty good gamble, but for real, I'll do it. Alright, back to the thing. This bone,
In our last video, my boyfriend went on a long rant about how Cyberpunk's controversial launch was the result of corporate greed and bad consumer practices, because it's the circle of games, and it's who's a soul. Thankfully, in this video, I'm not going to talk about any of that. I don't know what this game was supposed to be, or how it could be, or if Reddit don't think it be like it is, but it do.
It's funny stuff, but mean.
I just know this was a great game to watch someone else play. In fact, it's the only game on this channel I had to stop watching because I want to try. Oh my god! So, this is a review of Cyberpunk, but it's also a review of what it's like to live with someone who plays Cyberpunk. I don't know who I am anymore. This video is sponsored by Soundcore. We're super excited to work with them because they're partnered with Music Hairs, a charity for struggling musicians established by the Recording Academy, and their app has integrated Loom, a music streaming service to help you discover emerging artists. We'll tell you more about it after the video, so please stick around. Let's begin with the part where I carefully picked out my boyfriend's nail polish instead of letting him actually play the game he's been dying to see since 2012. Normally on these screens, he would just choose the box art guy and go, but during Cyberpunk's character creation, I think I spoke for the both of us when I said, it's ding dong time! Ding dong! A ding dong! Not since choosing a shaft in Star Wars have I seen him mull over a meaningless cosmetic option as long and hard as Ding Dong 1 and Ding Dong 2.
Well, I think we're
Not
gonna.
many options.
I think, as I said, I don't want to play myself. So for the first time in my life, I want to know what it's like to have a small wiener.
Unfortunately, V's appearance turned out to be totally meaningless, especially his being Pagina, because one, outside of the menu, he's a never nude.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, I need to be completely undressed.
I am completely undressed.
Even when he takes a shower. 2, even though this is a ray tracing masterpiece, the only reflection you can't see is the one I spent 2 hours putting makeup on. Oh my god, she's beautiful. I'm guessing the reason that V couldn't be rendered in all the hyper-realistic next-gen mumbo-jumbo is that it would be a waste of T-flops just to show off V's quality animations.
The feeling of being there, of walking the streets of the picture is really going to be breathtaking.
Although, you can check yourself out by taking cute selfies at the club. Then go to the bathroom and discover that you've actually been looking straight directed by Stanley Kubrick. Oh. And 3, no matter how proud you are of your personalized V design, if you care about stats, he's probably gonna be dressed kinda stupid. For the entirety of my boyfriend's 90 hours in this gritty, character-driven story, I doubt there was a single quest on which he wore something appropriate for these dire situations. V could enter gang territory on a mission to gather intel about the diabolical voodoo boys, and despite being told not to attract any attention, he'd walk right in the front door like a birthday clown who got the wrong address. Alright, V's fashion sense isn't really a big deal though, so let's move past the fedora and onto the plethora of Keanu Reeves!
Oh, this is special. You're breathtaking. You're all breathtaking. CD Projekt Red. Cyberpunk.
He performs the biggest role in the game, which might be the best role of his career, and I can prove it. Ready? What role suits Keanu Reeves better than a rebellious rocker boy in the Matrix named Johnny, whose plot involves a cybernetic brain implant and salvation from eternal damnation in a neon demon dystopia under intrusive high-tech oppression. And yeah, he's starting to think he's back for revenge using crazy good pistol skills. Now wake up and face the music, samurai. If the hype train couldn't maintain this kind of speed, it was always gonna be a release date the earth stood still, because something's gotta give when a society at point break has their expectations exposed as much ado about nothing, starting a chain reaction of gamers playing hardball to prove the whole thing is a bogus journey. But even cowgirls get the blues, so tune in tomorrow when those very same gamers suddenly play the devil's advocate to prove it was actually an excellent adventure, even more ahead of its time than Keanu's mailbox in the lake house. Little Buddha. My point is that this bullseye casting choice and Reeves' practically unrivaled star power in video games elevate Johnny Tsunami to the very top of best virtual companions I've encountered, surpassed only by Ellie from The Last of Us, Elizabeth from BioShock Infinite, and Luigi from Luigi's Luigi. He's a star! However, what separates Johnny from this list is his relentless pursuit to escape it and become the main character.
Gotta get out of here, understand?
He is a digital and devious spirit who constantly makes the player second guess the needs, beliefs, and objectives of V in favor of his own.
I got something better.
Even on side quests that are quite frankly none of his business, you literally cannot get Keanu out of your head. And when he does disappear, it's usually out of thin air while your back is turned, which almost always made my hilarious boyfriend say. Anyway, the writers attempt to weave a pair of independent character arcs into a twisted journey endured by two heroes sharing the controller of one gamer was, in my opinion, worth the $60. But maybe not quite the years of promotional overhype that felt like.
I see you shiver with anticipation.
Creating millions of overhyped gamers acting like.
Give me it. Give me it. Oh, give me it.
Come on.
On the other hand, being haunted by Johnny Bravo is merely the call to a much larger adventure with dozens of equally memorable friends, foes, and lovers all confronting their own existential cyberpunk dilemmas. Night City predicts a future when all of mankind's myths about magic, daydreams about heroic powers, and hopes about life after death are made possible through the technology of tomorrow. In the year 2077, supernatural is just natural, superhumans are just humans, and paranormal is just normal. In the year 2021, that all seems disturbingly probable. Like any day now, a dead billionaire's consciousness is going to get loose on the internet and start Zoom bombing. Okay, good morning, everyone.
You best start believing in ghost stories, Miss Turner.
Excuse me?
You're in one.
That's why this setting was extra captivating for me as a backseat gamer. It has all the sci-fi fantasy elements that make action-adventure gameplay so fun to watch without being so far removed from reality that I can't empathize with everyone. Because Goofy, what in the cocaine are you talking about? And Gears 5 is pretty fun, but I have no idea who this person is. Oh, I do remember Cassandra. Her dad died, and then she kicked a chicken. Okay, in Mortal Kombat, a bunch of karate cartoons were sad about realms. Wow, The Walking Dead. Now that was unforgettable, thanks to the subtle direction in scenes like eating our friend Mark, and the nuanced writing in scenes like shooting Duck in the face.
I like Call of Duty really paid off just then.
Despite the fact that Cyberpunk only lets you murder children with insults, hey, guess what? I don't talk to strangers.
Hey, guess what? I don't wear socks with sandals, idiot.
The majority of its scenes, from Terminator car chases to casual conversations, are unforgettable for the same reason as our favorite memories from real life. We were in good company. And the people in this game were such good company that my boyfriend doinked everyone possible. I mean, I don't blame him, they were freakishly hot. But that doesn't matter, because hot or not, whenever he met a new character, he'd ask himself out loud,
Am I gonna bang this bro?
snapping the specifics.
We're gonna bang them? Look at this cat. Are we gonna bang him?
Then once he did successfully bone someone, he'd feel post-gratuitous cutscene shame, so the next time they sent a text, he'd be like,
The one that's just obsessed with me.
but he never learned his lesson, because even during quests for River and Judy, who clearly weren't interested in male V,
We're gonna bone this guy? We're gonna bone this guy. He's got his little tushy out.
I could tell my boyfriend was still secretly hoping for romance by his persistence to choose flirtatious dialogue while making this face. So I did what any self-respecting girlfriend would do under these circumstances. I made a female V and let him watch me bang them. The end. Cyberpunk was awesome. You know what else is awesome? Our new sponsor. I already told you about the great stuff Soundcore is doing in the music community, but they're also doing great stuff in the earbud community. The new Liberty Air 2 Pros are not only mighty good looking, if I do say so myself, but they're super comfortable, which is always an issue for me with certain white plastic big name earbuds. The sound quality is great as well. You can even customize EQs in the Soundcore app. The Liberty Air 2 Pros also have 3 different active noise canceling modes: outdoor, transport, and indoor, so no matter where you are, you can tune out the hot garbage of the world and focus on what you're listening to. To purchase a pair of Liberty Air 2 Pro earbuds, please visit the link in our description. We really appreciate your support.
Oy, oy, oy. How am I still priming? Oh my god, too many monster screechers. Hour and a half.
This shot from 1917 shows Lance Corporal Schofield, played by George Mackay, running through a destroyed town and jumping off a high ledge into a river. It seems like just one long, continuous take. However, if you look behind the scenes leading up to this, the camera crew had to chase after George by jeep, motorcycle, and even by foot, as the actor then jumped off a ledge onto a mat, which was cobbled together with another shot of the character jumping into a river. This is just one of the many crafty ways the filmmakers made the movie look like it is all just one single shot. Getting it right required precise timing, the highest level of planning, and some incredibly clever shooting and editing. The entirety of 1917, a drama set during World War I, follows a pair of young soldiers trying to deliver a message to stop an attack. It was not actually shot in one take, but rather a series of continuous, uncut shots that were then cleverly connected to give the feeling of one long take. While this has been done before, 1917 presented many new challenges for the filmmakers. One of the earliest examples of a one-shot film was Alfred Hitchcock's Rope. A more recent example is Birdman. 1917 pushes it a step further with its persistent action and the constantly changing terrain. It never uses the same location twice. Who was up for this daunting task? Cinematographer Roger Deakins. Deakins earned a reputation as one of the greatest cinematographers alive today, thanks to his masterful work on movies like Skyfall and Sicario. He earned the Best Cinematography Oscar for Blade Runner 2049.
I mean, this is not sort of style of filmmaking that is well taught in film. It's a very particular film.
Director Sam Mendes wanted to create an immersive experience and put the audience in the shoes of a British soldier fighting in World War I. Getting the camera right up in the soldiers' faces as they moved through long, narrow trenches was a major aspect of that. First off, Because of all the long takes the crew would be shooting, 1917 required even more preparation than the average movie. For example, the crew built models of every single set, like this farmhouse that the two soldiers visit. Here is the model they built, and here's how it appeared in the movie. The models help the crew see how the overall scene should look. Take the scene where Schofield runs through a destroyed city. It was lit up by flares in the sky. Because the flares were the main source of lighting for certain shots in the scene, the crew needed to time exactly how long the flares would be in the air. So they tested it on a mini model of the city with a light contraption that traced which directions the shadows would move and how light would fall through the building's windows. Seeing the landscapes and sets in person was just as important for getting the entire continuous shot down. The art department built realistic sets from scratch. Each set needed to be able to accommodate the camera's path. For example, the barbed wire the two soldiers walked through in no man's land had angled pathways so the camera could get through. Ramps allowed the camera to pass from no man's land into the lower German trenches. Meanwhile, tunnel entrances had to be the exact right length to accommodate the camera and their cuts. One window was built to come apart so that the camera could pass through it. Perhaps most impressive of all was the 5,200 feet of trenches the crew had to build. As some of the most action-packed and challenging shots happen in these narrow pathways, it was crucial to measure everything. Every scene had to be the exact length of the land. So, if a scene shot lasted 8 minutes, it had to take exactly that long to get through that specific area. In an interview with Fox, Mendes said they wouldn't build a set until they knew exactly how long it should be. This required a lot of rehearsing. While all films require rehearsals, the process for 1917 was much longer and more rigorous. According to Deakins, on most films, these rehearsals can take place the day of shooting, but for 1917, walkthroughs were happening well in advance. They started rehearsing at Shepperton Studios near London and then moved to the sets. Every single line of dialogue had to be rehearsed on location. The whole process of blocking and rehearsing scenes went on for 4 months. Once they had gotten the lay of the land, measured everything out, and made sure every actor knew their lines and their marks, it was time to start shooting. There was another crucial step in pulling off this illusion. The camera could never move backward, only forward, as the characters had a starting point and a fixed destination and could never go back. One solution for that, letting the camera move 360 degrees. This allowed the crew to constantly move forward and follow the characters without making a visible hard cut. Productions of this size called for heavy equipment, but how was the crew supposed to deal with cameras that needed to be mobile? The solution, a new model of high-definition camera that was much lighter and smaller than usual. This gave Deakins the same great image quality, but also allowed for more portability and for the camera to more quickly be attached to something like a crane or a drone. A heavier camera would not have worked with the crew's stabilizers, which were crucial for when the camera operators had to walk and run after the soldiers.
Creatively, Sam and I talked about it. We wanted the camera to be quite steady. We didn't want to jump.
One can understand why the camera needed to be light, as there were cameras running further. Schofield's journey down river was captured mostly by the constant movement created another accidentally show up on screen during one of the movie's many 360-degree shots, mostly on natural light. Cloudy days were more optimal than sunny days, as sunny days meant
I mean, I'm looking at my weather app.
and because the movie took place in real time, the lighting had to look consistent. Sun in the sky meant production had to shut down for the day. Deakins needed to know not just how shots would look, but how they would be stitched together in post-production. Deakins and Mendes found subtle ways to make those cuts without the audience knowing, not the frame. Shots where characters traveled through doorways or entered a bunker also allowed for easier cuts. Take this shot, where the two main characters walk through a black curtain, a ledge into a river. If you look at the same shot behind the scenes, you'll see George running through that same city and jumping off a ledge, but instead of a river, he jumps onto a map. the help of some visual effects, the editors were able to seamlessly stitch together the character jumping off the ledge and into the rapids. And to capture the camera crew had to make sure they were completely in sync with the actor's every movement. Some parts of the maze-like sequence involved chasing after him with the camera attached to a motorcycle alongside a trench in the middle of battle. Endeavor.
We started on a 50-foot Technocrane that was armed in, say, as replacing George from the right-hand side. It climbs up with him as the camera's booming out on the arm. He hesitates at the Technocrane. Then the camera's taken off that Technocrane because the camera's basically on a stabilized head called a stabilizer. On. It's all moved. That moves back. George speeds up and starts running. Meanwhile, the two bricks that did that are in costume. So they find a way around to be able to come across the back of the shot. And you don't see them until that point in costume. And they were quite glad because they got money for being extras that day.
Once the camera was on the truck, it had to follow George as he ran for about a quarter of a mile. Meanwhile, as George is running out of the trench, you'll see him bump in, and they just kept the camera rolling. Had they called cut right away, this great, genuine moment capturing the chaos of the war would never have made it into the movie.
In my right side. I am my baby. Buddy, go back to your seat. 16. Oh, we're so close. Jesus. That should be fine. Is there anything else on that project that I missed? 2 Dominicons, Warlock Trigon, 2 X-Prints. Tyrant, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Okay. Guess that's it. Not point.